Hey, what's going on YouTube? Lightsaber Samurai here. I'm back again for another video, and for the last several months I have been shooting and making content with the Canon EOS M50, and man, this is a fantastic little powerhouse of a camera. It's small and compact, it's cheap, it has some pretty good features on it too to get you started right away with content creating and for photography for that matter, but this camera does have a few glaring issues that a lot of people like to point out when dismissing this camera. So in this video I'd like to talk about the three major issues with the Canon M50 and what I do to circumvent them. So without further ado, let's talk about it. Okay, so the first limitation we have is actually the battery life. The battery on this is actually pretty weak. This is the LP12 battery, the LPE12 battery, sorry, and it is like 875 milliamps or something like that. This battery, honestly, it's not that bad. I can go out and take pictures for quite a while using this, but as far as video goes, especially if I'm shooting in 4K, I'm getting well under 2 hours of battery life. Actually, with the shooting, if I'm shooting all 4K, I'm getting like an hour of battery life, like 45 minutes to an hour, which is not very good. 1080p, I'm usually fine though. I can go out and shoot a quick vlog and get that off, but it's always something that I have to be mindful of just because the battery life is not that good. So a couple of things to do to deal with this: you can always put it in eco mode. If I've got this if I get this rigged up and I'm using like an external monitor that has its own battery power and stuff like that, then I can put it on eco mode. That's gonna like dim the lights on the back screen of this and do some other things like that to save battery. Another thing would be to buy aftermarket batteries, and these here, the BM, these generic batteries are actually bigger as far as how much juice they got. They've got, what is it, 1150 milliamps compared to the 875 that are in Canon's standard battery. And so I bought these are super cheap. I'll put links in the description below, but you can get a 2-pack of these with the charger for like 20 bucks, and I've been using these for like 3 or 4 months now, and I haven't had any issues with them as far as them not charging or working or whatever the case. So with that, once you get to that point, you can shoot, I mean, like 25 to 30% longer than you can with the standard battery. And with that, I take 1 or 2 of these out just like I do with all my cameras, and I can shoot all day no problem. So yeah, again, links in the description for these. If you own the Canon M50 or thinking about getting them, one of the first things you need to buy with any camera is extra batteries anyway if you don't have them, and these are the ones to get. Okay, the next issue on this list is the 120 frames a second. This camera can do 120 frames a second, which is fantastic, but unfortunately it can only do it in 720p, and you lose sound and autofocus. So that is a huge issue. Personally, I'm not using sound anyway when I'm shooting that fast. If I'm shooting at 120 frames a second, it's gonna be for some slow-mo B-roll type of sequence or something like that. So it's not something that I'm gonna use sound for anyway. I'm gonna shoot a sequence with it and then put a music track over it. The 720p, it's pretty soft looking in a lot of cases. If you are using this for a professional means, this is not something I would recommend. There is some A-listing and moire that are going on. That being said, I came from the Canon T5i, a camera that's set almost 8 years old, and A-listing and moire was just a thing that I had to deal with as I was learning how to make YouTube videos and things like that. So I just, picked my shots and learned where to shoot, so that didn't become an issue. So for me, again, that's not a problem. There is no autofocus, but you do have focus peaking in this camera, and you can turn that on in the menu settings. You can just go over to the tab, turn on focus peaking. You can turn on the intensity of it and what color. I usually use red, which is the default. And with that, once you're dialing in the focus peaking, then you're gonna be in focus. Using wider angle lenses is another thing that would help with that. When you're shooting at 120 frames a second, as that kind of keeps everything in focus. You know, using something like converting over to like the Canon 10-18, for instance, with that 4.5 aperture, like that's gonna keep most things in focus. And that's another thing, when I'm shooting in 120 frames a second, I'm really mindful about my shallow depth of field, because if you're shooting on a fast lens like a 2.8 or a 1.8, something to that matter, it's gonna be really hard to rack focus. Even with the focus peaking, it's gonna be hard to keep things in focus, as opposed to shooting at a broader depth of field. So that's another thing that can help for that. And the last thing I would say is just shoot 60 frames. The 60 frames a second in this camera is fantastic. It shoots at a pretty high data rate. It looks fantastic. You've got the dual pixel autofocus when you do that. So I mean, a lot of people get hung up over 120 frames a second, but do you really need 120 frames a second, and how often do you really use it? Like I said, I have this camera, the camera I'm shooting on, which I'm not going to talk about yet. That's in an upcoming video. This camera also has 120 frames a second in 1080p, and I generally still just use 60 frames. So yeah, as far as that goes, do you really need 120? And if so, why? I mean, the 720 on this, actually, all in all, the 720 on this does look okay for YouTube. If you are watching this on I'll show some clips now. If you're watching this on a cell phone, it doesn't look that bad. It's definitely usable in a lot of situations. So, I mean, I would, if you really gotta shoot 120 frames a second, just shoot in 720. Or if not, I mean, just go for the 60. Okay, and the biggest limitation with the Canon M50, and this is the elephant in the room, it's definitely the 4K. Now, issues with the 4K include, again, no dual pixel autofocus. You got the phase detect autofocus, or the contrast based autofocus, whatever it is. It doesn't work that well in 4K. It's actually pretty slow in 4K. And then you've got an additional crop to deal with. And because of that, you know, because of this size, people were wanting this to be the 4K vlogging camera, and, you know, people were whining that they can't do it. But, okay, so let's talk about vlogging real fast. Just put a wider lens on there. It's not a big deal. You can put you can buy a COM-Light converter, though I'll link in the description, $40, and you can put something like the Canon 10-18 on there. What's up, guys? This is a test of the vlogging experience in 4K. I'm using the 10-18. Look at, hold on, I gotta show you guys this. What's up, Blue? What's up? What's up? There's cats all around here, and I love it. But again, the vlog experience, you can get it done on a camera like this. And I'm also using the digital image stabilization, so it's actually cropped in more than it normally would be. And there's Blue gone off to his home. One thing that is an issue is the rolling shutter. If you see that, the rolling shutter is terrible in 4K, so that I will concede to. But as far as just vlogging, yeah, you can totally get it done like this. And yeah, that's pretty much all I got. So naysayers, be proved wrong. And I'm not holding this super far from my chest, by the way. Okay, that's what it looks like held super far from my chest. All right, so I'm not doing that either, but yeah, I'm keeping it close to keep it comfortable, but you can totally get the job done. So go out there and vlog something. It's close enough to me too that I can just rack focus if I need to. Again, with the focus peaking, it's going to be super easy to do. And like I said, if you really want to, you could do it. There's a little more work to it, but I mean, boo-hoo. As far as shooting 4K, and for this camera, I think if you wanted to shoot something more cinematic, and if you are doing something that's more targeted as opposed to a vlog, which vlogs in nature tend to be pretty free form. But if you know what you're shooting and you get set up to shoot what you're shooting, the 4K, I think in this situation comes more into play. And the 4K on this is fantastic. The data rate is 120 megabits per second. Compare that to like the Sony's, which like the Sony A7 III, which has a data rate of 100 megabits per second. So it's actually higher than the Sony a7 III. That being said, the Sony a7 III is a 6K image downsampled to 4K. So the Sony still looks better, but the 4K out of this camera is pretty comparable. And of course, when you compare that with Canon's colors, you get a fantastic image. And just as long as you use the right gear with it, the 4K in this looks fantastic. Okay, so that's pretty much all I got for you. In closing, I just wanted to say there is no such thing as a perfect camera. Every camera has limitations. Rather than complaining about those limitations, I just try to embrace them as much as I can. Again, I started off shooting on like a Canon T5i and wanted to shoot slow-mo B-roll sequences and wanted to practice doing that, but I was discouraged because the Canon Rebels of the past, they only shot 60 frames at 720p, and it was a pretty ugly 720p. But at first, while I let it discourage me, I heard it was D4 Darius actually that said just embrace the limitations. So I said screw it, and at least started to use it to practice. And so my B-roll is a lot better now than it was back then, but that's okay. Now I've got the equipment to shoot better B-roll, whereas before I didn't. But you still got to get out there and play the game. You still got to practice. So whatever the limitations, just embrace them. Another limitation with this that people would say is a limitation is that it's an APS-C size camera and not a full frame camera. And while me personally, I don't really care too much about that, but a lot of people say that as a limitation. I embrace the fact that APS-C cameras have a plethora of cheap lenses that I can choose from, of all sizes and all focal lengths, and I can buy them used at a fraction of the cost as some of those full frame L series lenses, or the even more expensive, those L series RF lenses. I'm not paying $3,000 for a lens at this point in my career, but I will shell out, say for instance, this lens I'm using here, this is the old Tokina 11-16, and use $280. I will shell out $280, and like I said, I'm getting a decent image. It's a wide angle lens that's 2.8 all the way through. So yeah, I embrace the fact that I can get these cheaper lenses for less money. Alright guys, so that's all it, but let's talk about it in the comment section below. Questions, comments, concerns, threats. Do you guys have the M50? And if so, how do you deal with the limitations? Do you even care? If you're looking at this camera, I would say if you're thinking about buying this camera, just buy it. It's fantastic for the price point. The price to performance ratio of this camera is still unmatched in my opinion, and I don't think the limitations are enough to keep me from using it. But if you like this content, go ahead, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't done so already. You'll be glad you did. I do believe that's all I got for you. Lightsaber Samurai out, and peace.